Today's podcast sponsor is Huber Engineered Woods, and I want to talk to you about zip sheathing and why we use zip sheathing. I know you've heard me talk about it on the podcast before, but I thought let's just lay it out in the simplest of forms. Number one, when I install it properly, I tape the seams, I liquid flash the seams, I manage for water with my windows. I use their products. I don't have to worry about water. There are times when we install drywall inside of a house and we don't have cladding on the outside because I know Zip System is going to be waterproof. So that's number one. Number two, I can manage for air. So using Zip System sheathing on the walls, my last 5 houses we built were all below passive house levels of air leakage. They were all below that 0.6 ACH50. And we're not putting that much effort into air sealing. We're just making sure that we tape well, which we manage for water, we manage for air. And the last 5 houses that I built all had Zip-R, because that continuous insulation that comes adhered to the back of my zip sheathing that I'm already putting up and installing, now I have continuous R value that I get the whole R6 or the R9 or R12, whatever it is. I don't see building any other way. It works for us. It can work for you. Make sure you go to huberwood.com and check them out. And Huber, thanks for sponsoring the podcast. Welcome to the Unbuild It podcast. I'm Jake Bruton. I'm joined today by my co-host, Steve Basic.
Hi, Jake.
And Peter Yost.
Hey there.
And we've done one of these before, but we get enough questions that today is another question and answer. And I have the list. And today's Q&A list comes from Steve's post a few days ago about what would you like us to talk about, what questions, what topics. And we should note that this is not all of them. These are cherry-picked for what we thought content and what we would have valid answers for. And some of these are questions, and some of the things that you got are also going to be topics that we're just going to turn them into show ideas.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting, though, because there was one where they wanted to know all about when I was a talent scout for the circus. But you guys wouldn't allow me to talk about that, so I guess we're stuck with these 6.
Well, there's just so many things going on there, I don't even know what to say. But I want to say that you know how I feel about, what is it again, Instagram? IG, that's what it stands for? Steve, you kicked serious butt on this one. It was excellent.
Hey, thanks to our listeners.
Exactly. He wrote, what do you want to hear? The things that we got interested about came from other people.
But the idea use that
I want to back Peter up on here because you're an avid Instagrammer, but you didn't come up with this idea. So there.
I didn't even know that you had posted it on Instagram. So
it's okay. Don't worry. In the tags, I put Peter Yost is actually real. Peter Yost is alive. Peter Yost does exist.
I'll take the compliment of avid Instagrammer. Is that a compliment? I don't know if it is or not.
Nothing's a compliment coming from me.
So what do we got, Jake?
Yeah, so let's jump right in, and we'll just start with questions. We can kill the early show banter that we already kind of did. This is Viboletta6. Can a heat pump system be used with a radiant floor?
Peter, because you had the good answer to this one.
Well, I don't think it's a question of whether it can be used. Can a heat pump be used with a radiant floor system? The question is, should it be used in combination? And I don't think there's a terribly good match between what we get from the heat pump system and the radiant floor. So
expand a little bit. So we're talking about the potential output and the side effects of heat pump technology, or what?
Yeah, so you've got essentially a high mass system, which is going to take a long time to, basically change from conditions. And the heat pump excels at that relationship with a forced air system. So I just don't see that there's the best connection. Doesn't mean you can't do it, but I don't think you get the best properties of both systems combined when you go for a heat pump system for a hydronic system and that's high mass.
So let me ask this question, though, because I'm going to have to foil that a little. So you have something like the sand and water heaters, which are heat pumps, right? They take heat from the air and they put it into water. So if we believe that is a very effective system, which Jake has one in his house, I've put a couple in projects, and we find those to be effective, then how is the relationship of storing water to basically using it in a radiant floor and switching it back to heat in the room not an effective relationship?
I hate when you do that. Yeah, it's a good point. If we are doing air to water systems for heat pumps, now we've moved the heat pump system over to a hydronic one by nature, and then there is a better match. I guess my main issue is that radiant floor systems are maybe my difficulty more with the radiant floor than it is with the heat pump system, because radiant floor is sort of a contradiction in terms. Radiant is instantaneous and fast acting. Floor heating systems that are high mass are very, very slow. So, for instance, how do you take advantage of with setback with a radiant floor system? It's really difficult to do because the system is set up.
Yeah, it's like trying to corner in a locomotive. It just takes a long time to make that corner.
Well, it's actually why there's quite a few builders that I know in my market, this Climate Zone 4, that use them, and I hate them. Like, there are times
radiant floor systems, or
for my market, for my climate zone, for the most part, because there is a much larger section of the year where you're wanting a little bit of heat and not a lot, or you want a little bit of heat overnight, but you might end up having 75 degrees in the afternoon. Or the other morning, I woke up and it was 40 and it was 90 in the afternoon. The system doesn't react quick enough for me to justify large shoulder seasons, and we don't have a long, hard winter here.
So we got to jump on to the next ones, but I'll give the final word on it. It is harder to put heat into a liquid than it is into the air. You agree with that?
I do.
Right. So
I don't like giving you the final word, but
I guess the real the simplistic, boiling it down to that, the common denominator is you could do it, but like you said, why should you? Just because we can. And then you have to question, it is one of the hardest things is to take that energy out of the air and put it into water as opposed to putting it into an air ducted system.
And I think, I know you should get the last word, but
no, finish it up.
If you're in a mild climate where you're going to have to do significant space heating and cooling, there are pretty serious challenges with using that floor radiant system as a space conditioning system. And the other thing is, Steve, this is getting back to architecture. If you're in a climate where you're trying to get solar gain during the winter and not during the summer, you have to be really careful with radiant floor heating systems in terms of design for solar gain.
Yeah.
So I think it's a tough design question as well.
We just quit putting windows in buildings. Problem solved. Okay, question number 2 comes from Scotty Brew Builds. Any specs for hurricanes or tornadoes that go beyond code? Do we want to start with the architect again on this one?
No, but I'm going to come in real hot. With
I think we want to save
story.
our biggest gun for last. So I guess I would start by saying that if you're going for the most serious tornado, which is an F5, correct? And the most serious hurricane, which is, how do you rate hurricanes?
We'll just call it a big one.
Category 5. Sorry.
Hey, not a problem. That's what I'm here for, to help you out. Pick up
I think you have to be able to, first of all, not only tie everything down, but completely seal off all your glazing, right? So that's a pretty tall order.
Yeah.
Can it be done? Of course.
Yeah. Yes. I mean, we could build out a concrete and just be done with it too. ICF, maybe.
And I think one of the things is that we have a great program called the Fortified Home Program at the Institute for Business, Home, and Safety. So that's where I would start if I was looking for guidance on how to design for Cat 5 and F5.
It's one of those things where you have to design to some level of risk. And if you design for the most riskiest event, you're going to spend a boatload of money, which...
We're just playing a game of percentages, right?
It's an insurance risk. Because like you said, can I build it so it holds down? Yes. I've been in a building that was designed. Now, I didn't design it. I was actually working as an electrician in this building, and I think I told you guys, if I gave you a million choices, you would have never guessed the function of this building. But it was a llama barn hospital that we were working on. And the client had...
If I've ever heard of someplace that was laundering money.
A llama barn hospital.
So the client had a whole, I don't even know what you call a bunch of llamas, but he had like 50 or 100 llamas. He was a llama farmer. And he had a barn that you would bring them in so that you could work on them, shear them, and do different things, whatever you do with llamas, I don't really know. But half of it was the place that the vet came, so he wouldn't have to bring his llamas to the vet. The vet came there, and it was like a fully functioning operating room, hospital room in half of this barn. And when we talk about risk, the building was fully cabled. So it was like a timber frame structure that had steel cable anchored, and the steel cable went up over the roof around the timbers and was basically strapped the timber frame building.
So was it like a timber frame tent, sort of?
Yeah, it was something like that. And but the whole main structure was cabled to the foundation, which
I don't think a llama farm hospital falls within the Institute for Business, Home and Safety.
I mean, it's just a building.
Yeah.
I mean, we could also just bury the building, bury it in a place where it won't flood, and put it below ground. That's why they put missile silos. I mean, I'm guessing they were trying to hide the missile too. But
well, that's probably part of that. Yeah.
But that's put it below ground so nobody can see it.
Exploded in the ground.
But if you had to design in the two biggest ways for a Cat 5 or an F5, it would be tie down for wind uplift, right?
Yeah.
And then impact resistance to glazing.
Exactly.
Would that be the two?
Exactly. But if you breaking it down to like the least common denominator, I can design a floor to carry 1,000 pounds a square foot. But unless I'm storing something
that's close to
1,000 pounds a square foot, why would I design the second floor bedrooms to 1,000 pounds a square foot? Just because I can? No. Right? At some point you have to pick where you feel comfortable, but there's still risk above it.
You know, the other place I think you should go for guidance on this is you're really talking about resiliency in the face of major events. And Alex Wilson for Building Green has a website called the Resilient Design Institute, I think it's called RDI. And there's a lot of good information on how to make buildings, not only in terms of the building enclosure, but the mechanical systems.
So one of the things I've often wondered about is how many times a repeated catastrophe happens to a structure. Like, we build structures, we build them really crappy. A tornado comes, wipes it out, and then in the interview with the homeowner, yeah, we're going to rebuild. Oh, okay. And then they're going to put the same house on the same piece of property in the same town in the same path of tornadoes or hurricanes, right? When do we learn something and then say, maybe we don't build that close to the cliff anymore?
You know, what's funny about this, Steve, is that my master's degree when I started at Virginia Tech
42
was on the National Floodplain Insurance Program, looking at it as a resource issue. And our first national flood insurance program was in 1955, the year I was born. And every time we had a flood, we would go to the people who had built there and say, well, if you don't have flood insurance, you really shouldn't be building here. But then there's FEMA comes in and says, well, we really need to help these people because, they've faced a major catastrophe, and we let them rebuild there again. And it's now how many years since 1955? Well, I was born. That's 65 years. We still haven't figured out how to accommodate disaster relief and building in the floodplain.
Well, isn't it beautiful that our government has an agency that wakes up January 1st of every morning and says, we're going to contribute $50 billion because we know somewhere along this year we're going to build really crappy houses in very high-risk environments that are going to blow over, that we're going to have to pay to rebuild and take care of.
It sounds like we need to move this to a topic and not a question, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Question number 3. Wait, sorry. Summation of question number 2 is we can do whatever you want. We just need to know the design parameters and the budget.
I think that's it. Just because we can doesn't mean we should.
Bob Kelly asked basically for thoughts on natural effective non-mechanical passive venting in high-performance buildings.
Say that real fast.
I just did.
3 times.
Okay. So let's talk. What is natural venting or passive venting that Bob's asking about? It's not mechanical, right? We're talking about punching holes or leaving windows open or something of the sort, right?
I mean, the fancy thermal siphon architect diagram always comes to mind when I hear that. You get that big blue arrow that squiggles through a building and goes out something at the top and flushes all this nice cool air in during the day. But I think Peter will be the first one to point out you need a force, right? We need something that's driving that. It just because we do a diagram, air doesn't just wake up and say, oh, the arrow shows us we should move. Let's move. And let's move really fast and drain this air out of the building. It doesn't quite work that way. And me personally, I think the more high performance of a building that we build, the more we're working against those natural effects. Right?
Which is not a bad thing.
Which isn't a bad thing, but our air tightness is basically reducing forces across the wall system for good reason.
Yeah, and we know that the 3 ways to move air are stack effect, wind, and fans, mechanical systems. So if we take out fans, we've now got stack effect and wind. So I hear all the time, this is a big topic on Green Building Advisor about if you use these passive vents to provide that ventilation. Well, when will you have the driving force? Well, when you have stack effect or you have wind. Well, if it's really, really cold out and the wind's blowing, are you going to be able to over-ventilate that house? Because the passive
let's ask the
vents...
question, will the wind be blowing? Right? Because if the wind isn't blowing, and on a beautiful night in September where you say, hey, I'm going to drain the house of some of this heat.
Maybe the answer is in the requirements for mechanical ventilation, which are why do we mechanically ventilate? The right amount over the right period of time for the load
the number
the
of
building
occupants
is seeing, right? And all those things are pretty counter to the forces of stack effect and wind.
Well, you mentioned stack effect. If you're building a high-performance home, we're building against stack effect, right? We're trying to de-stratify the temperature in the building. And make it a common temperature.
I mean, if you ask a mechanical engineer, like Kroon Hall at Yale is both built from an engineering standpoint for passive systems and for active. And in the building, actually, there's a light that comes on in every space that's red, which means the building should be closed, and green for when you're supposed to open up the windows. The system rarely works as it's designed because, A, it's dependent on the occupants.
Well, it's what questions are those lights asking, right? Those are going back to some kind of control that is asking some kind of question that if they're not the right questions, or even if it is 5 of the right questions, those 5 of the right questions have a number of variable combinations that are either going to prove to be helpful or hurtful.
Yeah. And I think the answer is if you can't rely upon the passive strategies of either wind or stack effect, then you have to have a system that can do both. Like when conditions are right, you go passive. And when they're not, you go mechanical. It opens
the windows for you.
Engineers will tell you, man, we've never been able to figure out how to make the building switch from passive strategies to mechanical strategies without it stepping on each other.
Well, even if you look at the foundation dampers for crawl spaces, that's the simplest little heat active coil, and they still don't work. You know.
I'm going to give the last word on this one too. I'm going to build a strategy here. So Dan Roy's house. Passive house, did a bunch of stuff. Dan Roy's a retired engineer, so he likes to understand things.
We should do an episode just on Dan's house, by the way.
Yeah, he, great idea. He, a couple times has opened windows upstairs and downstairs to measure thermal siphoning in his. And his is a certified passive home. We're talking probably 0.4748 for air tightness on it, 2,600 square feet, 2-story slab on grade house. And he's challenged the thermal siphoning concept a number of times. He said at best, he can change the temperature about 4 degrees through the night. in doing that.
Which is almost nothing.
Which is probably almost nothing. In his house, it's a little more than nothing because when you go from, say, 72 to 68, you probably do feel it because it's 68 everywhere in the house. But in an average house, like the one I grew up in, if you went upstairs, you probably had an 8-degree temperature difference in the summertime.
On a mild day, right?
Yeah.
But I have to say, Steve, I never thought of this, but Dan Roy seems like a bit of a wingnut. I think we need to get him a hat.
Dan Roy is wingnut extraordinaire.
We're going to have to do a wingnut thing with Dan.
If I set up a phone call with you and him, you'd be on there for a day or two.
I can't wait
talking. He's measured pretty much every conceivable
Pay your cell bill
number.
before that phone call.
House, yeah. There you go.
Okay, I'm gonna answer this one first, and then let you guys react.
You know what, Jake? You should go first on this one.
Thank you for that.
You're welcome.
This one's from Kevin Link. How do you plan for solar panels on a roof? I will say that the simplest way that we plan is we follow a one-sheet guideline that the City of Columbia gives us that requires space in the panel that's labeled as such for future solar, even if you're not putting it on, conduit from at least the attic to the panel or a route as well, and 600 square feet of south-facing uninterrupted roof. Now, here's the interesting thing. I have a little house that I built not too far from my personal house that the south wall is, the roof is a shed-style roof that only has north face. And I went to the city with it, and they said, oh, well, if you don't have south-facing roof, then you don't have to worry about those requirements. And I was like, oh, this has been thought through.
That sounds like a catch-22.
Yeah. If I don't want to have uninterrupted roof, all I have to do is just make it north facing.
So I'm working on a house right now down on the Cape of Massachusetts, and one of the big issues was moving panel and reduce roof capacity away from all the perimeter edges because of wind uplift. What do you think, Steve?
So I think that in general, I've had numerous conversations with my structural engineer over solar panels, and they always, I don't say they scare him, but they get a rise out of him. And they get a rise out of him because when you sit there and you say, okay, we're going to put a solar array on this roof. Well, you don't know where the attachment's going, right? Because it's Jimmy and Billy going up there someday 6 months from now and screwing down a unistrut system where they feel like it. Mm-hmm. And it's really different that you basically, like you were just saying, you're putting this kind of kite flat on the roof that air can get under, right? And then the closer to the edge of the roof, the slightly stronger kite effect you're going to have.
Which is the same with just the overhangs, just the roof part of the house.
It's the same with the roof overhangs. But the thing is, with the roof overhang, the structural engineer can clearly calculate what it is, where things are going, how they get attached. He doesn't ask me, well, what kind of screws are they using for the unistrut system? How deep are they going in? And well, he settles for the worst case scenario when he designs it and lays it out. But in your case, when you said, how do you feel about that? Well, I feel that we could probably do a solar array in a hurricane environment. We just have to get it designed. So we might be adding extra rafters. We might have a layout for the unistrut system that embeds into the rafter system and not just the roof sheathing and stuff like that. I do know I've had a number of clients where when we're doing standing seam metal roofs and stuff, they were a little apprehensive about their solar panels. And we ended up doing things like doubling the number of clips. So instead of, say, 16 inches on center, we'd put them on 8-inch centers all the way up so that the metal roof is more securely attached to the roof sheathing. And then when we attach the unistrut system to that, we actually added more than normal attachments.
That's a real carpenter solution, by the way. When in doubt, put more screws or nails in it.
Just add more connections.
Add more connections.
Can I do 2 quick added things on the PV? One.
Do we want to vote?
Go ahead, because
we voting?
I'm thirsty anyway. So go ahead.
So one is, I was just talking in class, Candace Pearson from Building Green did a lecture for the Yale class. It was really interesting. She said they're encouraging the placement of PV panels on western-facing roof slopes because that more closely ties when peak cooling demand is right? So that you get more PV generation
later in the
that
day when
matches
your
up.
air conditioner's
So
cranking.
it's really interesting that they're encouraging in some areas time of use for linking PV generation to time of use peaks.
Yeah.
So it's
for houses without battery backup.
Yeah.
You know, it's interesting. When I went over to Europe and looking at windows, we were driving all through Germany and stuff. In Germany, if north roofs were the only roofs that didn't have solar panels on it.
Everything
If
else
it
was
east, west, south, partial roofs, shed roofs, porch roofs. If it could fit a solar panel was put on it.
That's because they don't pay 11 cents a kilowatt hour there.
Well, there you go.
well, and then the last thing is ground mount. How do you decide whether to go on the roof or go to the ground mount? Because when we looked at my house with slate, you know, I'm not going to put a.
I've actually
system
done a couple
with
ground mounted. What do you like? Articulated systems,
solar
where they actually
trackers?
solar
Yeah.
tracker, and we significantly reduced the amount that we had to do because not only do they track, but they tilt.
Yeah.
So you always get that perpendicular nature, and you can get a west facing
Yep.
solar array out of that, right?
Yeah.
You can get the east facing, and this one is on a hill, so it's actually the highest point between Springfield and Boston, and they handle their whole house with.
the sunflower of solar panels.
We ought to have a guest speaker on here, like a PV expert. I'd love to do that.
Okay, I'll make a note.
I just get a shirt made Steve Bazek PV expert. And we just talk about it.
PV for pervert all of a sudden.
If I have the shirt, I
Now
can.
that was uncalled for.
Sorry. It's habit. Okay, our next question is for Stellar Cuisine.
I'm guessing he's a chef.
Probably. Fireproofing for overland burns, housing at the urban forest interface. So how are we going to deal with
I just
everything
like the
around
urban forest interface.
That's pretty good. Yeah.
I
how do we
got
deal
an
with
anecdotal story to that.
that's
We told them
talked
about
this.
anecdote and stories.
You have an anecdote or you have a story.
No, I have an anecdotal story. So in architectural theory class, our teacher actually gave us a chart that had 3 columns of words, and you could put any word from column 1 with any word in column 2 and any word in column
neat.
3 to teach you how to talk about architectural and stuff. But
This is more pompousy than going to art school.
yeah, but it's a way to think about. So it's like when I see urban forest interface, it's like that those 3 words came out of those 3 columns.
We had that in agronomy. It was like dirt, clay, grass.
Aggregate. Okay, so back to our question. The number one move is don't put it in a bunch of trees, right? If it's not surrounded by things that can burn, and I know that sounds overly simple, but even if you are in a burn location, you have a safety perimeter, right?
Yes.
Well, and certainly since we've had such incredible wildfires across the country. I mean, Steve Quarles was a guest speaker at Building Science Summer Camp. You know, Joe Stieberg and Betsy Pettit running it. And he was a urban wildfire interface expert. And it was really cool because
Say that real fast.
once was it all that's going to happen was sometimes like ventilating claddings, which is really good for moisture control, is a real no-no for
It's a spot to suck in embers.
Especially if
Yeah.
that is connected to the roof immediately, because now you can
Exactly.
get a fire coming up from the ground, goes right up your wall, right into your attic, and the whole house catches on fire before you even realize
So it was really
it.
cool to look at integrating moisture control with wildfire control. But again, Steve Quarles just retired, but he was working with the Institute for Business, Home and Safety on their wildfire management program. So there's a great set of guidelines that you can get from IDHS.
So again, go to someone else for the information you need, is what people
Well,
say.
and you might not know this, but on YouTube, there's a number of videos that people have done designing towards this interface. Because I currently have a client that we're doing a house in Colorado, and his big concern is, I don't want to build this house and have it burned down in 2 years when a wildfire comes through there. Is there something that we can at least do that can help mitigate that? You know, if it's, I mean, granted, if it's a fire that's raging and coming by, there's probably not a whole lot you're going to do about it. But if it's one that you can kind of get to go around, your
I
house.
I love when during the Q&A I learned things like I thought YouTube was just a competitor with Spotify.
No.
So
So the YouTube,
Peter's just saying internet words now.
Yeah,
and
he's just
pretending like he
throwing
knows
them
what
out
they.
there.
I
It's
know
like
my
the
daughter
circuit
calls
business.
them. Yes, he's
like,
picking.
yeah, I'm real smart, and I'm 2021 appropriate. But
He still refers to it as the confuser every time he goes to type something.
But the client came and he was asking these questions, and immediately all these things are coming to mind. Like, can we put in a well that's dedicated to a sprinkler system that's directly around the perimeter of the building, so we can fully saturate the first 20 feet to the house and actually create a wet island, if you will.
If we're going to
in
do
the
that, why don't we
forest.
sprinkle the house too?
Right.
well, there actually
there
are
are, or
systems.
could we put those systems in the eave, and so that they do that? But then you have
Freeze
floating embers and all this stuff. You have freezing to deal with, so it does bring up a whole host of questions. And this goes back to a lot of the questions we have. You know, at what level of risk are we trying to satisfy? Right? Because
Can we just not live there? Is that what you're trying to
Well,
say?
no, but I'm just saying, does it make sense to put a sprinkler system that douses the whole house in water at the risk of that water freezing, causing other problems?
Well, the great thing is that, as particularly IBHS, as a whole, here's the easiest things to do. You know, here are the things that are more expensive and more.
And there is that, like, keep everything clear for about 50 feet around the house so the fire can't burn anything up to the house, right?
And then you only have to deal with embers.
Yeah, you see some of these on TV. It's like the people are, oh, my house is burning down, and it's in this, like, the trees are hanging over the house. It's like, yeah, that's pretty much a no-brainer there, people.
You were one step away from just lighting it yourself.
Exactly.
At that point.
Like a bad campfire in the backyard, bad bonfire gone rogue in the backyard. Your house
Pine
is
needles.
coming down. Yeah,
the pine needle blanket everywhere.
exactly. So,
Yeah.
but
Okay.
good
Well,
question.
we're going to have more Q&A in the future.
And a whole bunch of them got elevated to topics.
Yes, they did. So focus or stay tuned for topics that you asked.
And a couple of them we just thought were bad, so we threw them out.
There you go.
We come sorry? Well, how about Steve?
This list is in Steve's handwriting if anybody wants to complain about not getting their question answered.
Blame
Not me.
That's it. I'm the scapegoat of this podcast. We all know it. It's all right.
He's really tortured over this. So, thanks for watching the podcast today. Thanks for listening to the podcast today. If you're just listening to it, even if you turned on YouTube and then you didn't pay attention to
At least
the
you didn't
screen,
bash the military today.
I did
that
not.
was good. So
at least you didn't bring up any garbage 1980s movies. Don't forget to click like and subscribe. Tell a friend. Leave a review on iTunes. Leave us a 5-star review. Send us a message through IG. Let us know what you want on the next Q&A. And we'll play a game called Can You Find Peter on Instagram. Till next time, I'm Jake Bruton. Thanks for listening.
I'm Peter Yost. Thank you.
Like he said.